Welcome. This is the brand new top 10 units of Medieval, and we're looking at the brand new DLC Storm of Arrows. It only came out about a week ago. I've been messing around with the armies, messing around with the units, just for you, just to get a top 10 together. This is my opinion. You might not agree. If you think I've left anything out, please leave comments below. It was a little difficult. I was going through the units, going through the army lists, but overall I'm pretty happy with my choices. There's some great new units, some unique units, and I really like that's one of the things I've always been saying. We need more unique units, and let's start by looking at a rather unique unit, the Gallo Glake. This wonderful Scottish unit. Now, this is going in at number 10. It almost didn't make it, actually, to be quite honest with you, because my number 10, my original choice, was going to be the Lowland Spear. But when I did my testing and when I looked at the stats, they were actually struggling a little bit against armoured units, especially. And so, overall, I felt that this unit, at the price 51, it's a superior quality unit. You don't get that many superior quality units in the 50s at all, in Ancients or in Medieval. Now, there was some comment made on the forums by Greebol. Greebol started a thread, and he said that these units actually are a little bit underpriced, considering their performance and their quality. I responded and I said that, okay, you can't just look at the unit, you've got to look at the army list as well, and the army. And originally they're in the Irish lists, and the problem with the Irish list is, apart from these units, it drops right down to the it's medium infantry, and they're not that great. The units that you get in the Irish lists, you don't really get any heavy foot, spear, any armoured infantry. So in that sense, the Irish really need these units. And even the Scottish list, when you look at the Scottish lists, we've got no cavalry, we've only got 5 kinds of units, we've got hardly any skirmishers, no artillery, so no light horse, nothing. So it's just infantry, completely infantry dominated. So I think, well, let's see how they do in the tournaments and games in multiplayer, and we'll get feedback. But you also got to take into account the armies that they're in. But they do definitely deserve to be in my top 10. Superior quality with heavy weapon. In my tests against infantry, around the same price or a bit cheaper, or even a bit more. They're 50 up on impact against defensive spear, 50 up against armoured spear, 50 up against billman on impact, 50 up against Welsh spear, all because of their quality. They're even 25 up against the mercenary men-at-arms, because we don't count the armour until the melee phase. And they're evens against dismounted men-at-arms. Can you believe it? Because of their quality. So on impact, they're fantastic against all infantry. And then once in melee, 50 up against defensive spear and armoured spear, a 40 up against billmen, who get a slight 10 extra for their heavy weapon, 62 up against Welsh spear, and the 25 down against dismounted mercenary men-at-arms, but that unit costs 72. Only 25 down in melee against the unit that costs 72, and then they're 60 down in melee against dismounted men-at-arms. But again, that unit, dismounted men-at-arms, are 81, 30 more than this. So yes, without doubt, they are a bit of a bargain. It must be said. One thing about them, as opposed to offensive spear. They don't push back units, don't follow up. So in my tests, when they were winning the melee, a lot of the time the enemy unit was falling back and they were just standing still. So that is something to consider in your overall plan. Sometimes it's best to get pushbacks and follow up. Other times it's not, because other units might block you off, or they might fall back onto a hill or into a marsh or something. So anyway, just something to bear in mind, that they don't follow up like spearmen. Okay, so they go in at number 10. At number 9 on my list, I'm going for the Billman. This is a new unit, which is always good to see. I'm not saying that it's the absolute best unit around. There might be other units that deserve to be in the top 10 more than this unit. But in this kind of army, this is the French 1445 AD list, it serves a purpose. And also, one of my criticisms of the game is we don't see enough what I class as mid-tier infantry units. This is something we see in Ancients, where you kind of go from a medium foot and hoplites, and then it jumps up to legionnaires, pikes in the 70s, superior warband. There's not many units in the 40s and 50s. The same with medieval, although it is with the latest brand new DLC, Storm of Arrows, it's changing a bit. But I always like to see more units in the 40s and 50s, and we have them here. The Billman, good price. Also, when I checked out the stats, when I put them up against units around their price, a bit less, a bit more, and they do pretty well. Defensive spear, Welsh spear, Scandinavian foot, armoured spear, halberdiers, they are evens on impact against all of those units, evens on impact. In melee, they're 35 up against defensive spear, 47 up against Welsh spear because that unit is only lightly protected, 5 up against Scandinavian foot, 10 up against armoured spear, and evens again against the halberdiers. So up against almost all of those units and evens at worst. And then I also just, for a bit of fun, I checked them out against veteran spear, like the Muslim veteran spear, and they're 50 down on impact and 15 down in melee, but that unit costs 57 and they're only 45, so 15 down in melee, it's not bad. Their armor and the heavy weapon comes in useful. At number 8, and number 8 on my list, I'm going to go for the crossbowman. This is the first bowman unit on my list, but there are a few more. And with the new DLC in the late Middle Ages, bowman units, missile fire, guns, they all become more important. And this unit is right in the center of all of that. I think it's a really good price, a fair bit cheaper than longbowmen with stakes or even the standard longbowman. 41 is good. And what I also like about them is, compared to longbowmen and raw longbowmen, the Welsh longbowmen, units like that, they actually have some armor. They've got some armor. And they look really neat, don't they, with these shields? They look really cool. So that gives them a little bit of an advantage in terms of taking missile fire, because they've got some armor as compared to just being protected. Also in my tests, these are the early round of tests because I'm still playing with these armies from this brand new DLC, but it seems that the crossbow does, and historically it did better against armor than longbowmen did. So it seemed to be about 23 was the average per volley. That was the casualties on something like a Billman, an armored unit. So per volley, if you're getting 22, 23 casualties, if you concentrate your fire, it's quite easy to get disruptions in the enemy line before impact. So these guys are really important and useful. This is actually the Free Company 1415 AD list. So we've got some of the men at arms, the mercenary type. We don't really have any sort of mid-range infantry. It just jumps down to medium foot. So your missile fire is just going to be all that much more important for this kind of army. So they're going to go in at number 8. At number 7. At number 7 on my list, I'm going to go for the light guns. If we zoom in, they look quite spectacular, and just like artillery. I'm quite familiar with the Napoleonic period. I've done a lot of gaming in that period, and when you look at them, they look just like artillery of the 19th century. So we are really beginning to go into the artillery period with these kind of guns. Now I do think they are pretty tricky to use. In themselves, they don't really cause that many casualties, but the way the game is designed and the way you probably should use them, it's not so much the casualties, it's the cohesion checks. So I think if you use them in conjunction with crossbowmen, longbowmen, skirmishers, force a cohesion check with the bowman, and then you fire, and then you get that additional -1 modifier, and you can quite often disrupt units. This is the key. You've got to really use them in conjunction with skirmisher fire, missile fire. If you use them on their own in isolation, they're not that effective, really. And then if we compare them to the heavy art, the bombards, really it's the same kind of story. I mean, even the bombards, they don't cause that many casualties. Maybe if you're lucky, 20, 30 perhaps, but most of the time it's only 2, 4, 6 casualties. And again, it's really about disruptions, and there's no difference, or hardly any difference that I've seen anyway, between bombards and light guns in terms of causing disruptions. So overall, when you factor in the price, light guns are only 24, bombards at 36, a little bit more mobile. I think that these are good value. And this list, the German city 1400 AD, you can take quite a lot of guns. You can take 2 bombards and 3 of the light guns. So I'd probably at least take 2 in this kind of army. Often you don't get that option. So I think that they can be very effective. You do need to, unlike the artillery of the earlier periods that could fire over your line, these guns can't. So that is the tricky part. You need to keep a gap there. Yeah, it was much easier in the past just to have your art behind your lines and fire over, and they were protected. But these guys really have to have some kind of gap to fire through. So that is a slight disadvantage. But overall, in this period, I think with more bowmen on the battlefield, crossbowmen, missile fire is going to be important. So when you use these guns in conjunction with your bowmen, you can do quite a lot of damage against even fairly heavily armored troops. So yeah, they're going to go in at number 7. At number 6, on my list, I'm going to go for the raw longbowman without stakes. Now, as I've been saying, brand new DLC. I've still got to test this unit out, but I just think at the price and for what they can do, the damage they can inflict on the enemy, they do pretty well. I just had on my test runs, I had them up against some Billmen, and the Billmen are armored units, but the average per volley was 15 to 16 casualties. That's what they were getting per volley on the Billmen, which is pretty good. So after 3 volleys, they were causing cohesion checks, although the Billmen were passing all of them. But you know, for a unit that only costs 32, raw quality unit, that is pretty good. Now, you have to be really careful how you use them. They don't have stakes. They're pretty rubbish in the open field. You need them as very much as support units, supporting your main line of archers or the dismounted men-at-arms. Behind the line, second and third line, in the forest, on a hilltop, in the marsh, wherever it might be, as supporting units, adding to the missile fire. I think they can do a great job. And also, when you look at the prices of all of these different kinds of bowmen, we've got so many kinds of bowmen now, especially in the this is the English 1415 AD list. I think for their price that they come out of it quite well. It's very good value for money, because the main bowman units that you're going to be using are the longbowmen with stakes, and they're almost double the price. Crossbowmen I like, but they're quite a bit more than this unit as well. With the stakes, you're paying 9 more, and probably for these kind of units I'm going to be moving them around a bit, because if they're in my second and third line, I want to move them to maximize my fire on a particular spot or plug a gap or whatever it might be. So probably it's going to be more my mainline frontline troops that are going to have the stakes. So I think their price, and also the Welsh longbowmen, I mean, that's 7 different. I've got to maybe do more tests, but do the Welsh longbowmen do that much more damage again with these guys? I mean, 7 difference. I'm not sure that they do. Okay, they might do a little bit better in melee, but not by much, because they're pretty awful in themselves, because they're only bowmen. Doesn't matter if you're raw or average or whatever, bowmen are not going to do well against any kind of infantry. So I think the price, great. Light longbowmen I think are a bit of a waste of money as well, so I really like their price at 32. I think if you can play carefully with them, know what you're doing, plan ahead, you know, put them in positions where they're not going to be charged, then, you know, that firepower that they have, they can come in very handy. So for me, they justifiably go in at number 6. At number 5, number 5 on my list, I'm going for the lesser men-at-arms, like lancers. They're known by various names in the French lists. Breton 1400 AD, which is this list. Burgundian and Free Company lists, they're lesser men-at-arms. For the English, they're light lancers. And in a few of the Arab lists, they are Bedou cavalry. But they are the cheaper end lancers at 36, average armored, excellent value for money, excellent value for money. I noticed as well that this is the very first cavalry unit on my top 10 list, and I guess that demonstrates in this period, late to Middle Ages, it's the decline really of cavalry, and you see a lot more bowman units, heavy infantry that is just able to hold and beat back cavalry. So yeah, infantry dominated era. But these units at the price, very mobile, they get that 100 extra POA advantage for being Lancers on impact. Because there might not be as much cavalry around, they can do a really devastating job. If they can get round the rear of the enemy, hit them on the flank once they're engaged, cavalry or infantry, then they can do a lot of damage, even though they only cost 36. So really good value for money. Definitely deserve to go in at number 5. At number 4, I'm going to go for the Longbowman with stakes. There are a few versions. You can get the standard Longbowman for 56, and then you just pay a little bit extra for the version with the stakes, and then you've got the raw version as well with stakes and without. These units are some of the kind of key units of the new DLC Storm of Arrows. They really changed the way we play, different dynamic to the battles. This is the force selection screen, so I don't actually have the stakes out. But you know, when they're really in a good defensive position, you've got the stakes out. I was testing them up against their arch enemies, the French, and even against the best French units, the dismounted men-at-arms. If the dismounted men-at-arms get the charge in and then go into melee, then I think it's fairly even on impact, and then it's 2% chance to win for these longbowmen against the dismounted men-at-arms, 75% chance to draw, which is fantastic for this kind of unit. It's a bowman unit effectively, and then 23% chance to lose. So in my test, my second round of testing, when I was testing them against the dismounted men-at-arms, they were holding for a long time. Actually, none of my units disrupted, which is really good, because I think in the first round of testing that I did, there were quite a few disruptions, fragmentations, and then routes. But in the second round, I tried to keep it fairly even on points. So I had around 5 of these longbowmen with stakes up against 3 dismounted men-at-arms and a billman unit, which works out roughly about the same points. And these guys were holding very well. I will also say that even though, because of the armor now with the new DLC, they don't do much damage against your dismounted men-at-arms. It was per volley, it's only about 8-10. That was the average per volley, and which is nothing really. But they did far better against units like the billman, where they were getting 24 casualties and 31 as well in one round, and they actually disrupted a billman unit in just 2 volleys. So that was really good. So I guess you just got to focus more on the weaker units in the French line or any enemy line, and then just take your chances that you're going to be able to hold against the dismounted men-at-arms, which you've got a fair chance of doing. With 75% chance to draw is great, and then you can do damage in other areas. The English have got their own dismounted men-at-arms as well, so that's good. I have to be honest, when I first was using them, I didn't think they were that great. I didn't think they were as strong as I expected. But as I've played more games, this DLC only came out a few days ago, and I've played some games, and I've done my testing, and it does seem that if you get a good defensive position, focus fire on weaker units, and then you've got a great chance of holding even against the better units. So they are really a good unit, and they do deserve to go in my top 10, and at the moment I've got them in at 4, and I think they deserve their spot. Third on my list, I'm going to go for the Swiss halberdiers, these wonderful troops. I have actually taken this army out. I did do a test run, and it was interesting because you hardly get any units in terms of variety. Slingers, this is one of the only late Middle Ages armies to have slingers. Some light crossbowmen, so 2 skirmisher units, and then 1 infantry unit, and then just some light crossbowmen. It's a really crazy army list, but I actually won. I was playing one of the Italian factions, and these units are actually pretty good. So there's a few reasons why. They're superior quality, which is great, so they'll pass cohesion checks. They're a large unit, so they also get the overlapping bonus, which is plus 15, which is good as well. They can form square, which a lot of units can't do, and also they are very fast. They can actually move 3 squares. 3 squares, not 2. They can move an extra square. So they can really move it, shift it. So you've got to exploit the weak spots of the enemy army with this kind of list and just go in. It's very much a hammer army. You can't really sit back. You may as well use your speed, because you don't really have cavalry, you don't have arts. Yeah, you don't have any cheaper infantry, so you just got to get these guys going as soon as you can. It's a bit like really playing with the Roman armies of the ancient period, kind of similar. Just get these going, because when you look at the stats, they're up against most infantry. Even the dismounted men at arms, they're evens on impact. Then they're plus 50 up against billmen and armored spear, for example, and plus 25 up on impact against dismounted mercenary men at arms. So, and then obviously the standard defensive spear and cheaper units, they're going to be up even more than that. So they're going to beat most units on impact, and then once in melee, okay, they're down 45 against dismounted men at arms. But then they're up 65 against armoured spear, they're up 55 against billmen, and they're up 10 against dismounted mercenary men at arms. And a lot of those units are average quality, so again, they're going to have the advantage for the cohesion checks because they are superior. Not so many units are superior quality. So that's good. Against cavalry, they can usually hold. In some of my tests, they were actually disrupting against your men at arms and the mercenary men at arms, but most of the time they'll hold. They're down 100 on impact against men at arms, and they're down 75 against the mercenary type. But most of the time, again, because of their quality, they'll survive impact and then just hold really, and while the cavalry loses men and loses effectiveness. And if they can get them in melee, they're well up against even those units. The men at arms are only on a 6% chance to win in melee against this unit. So a pretty decent unit, a good price. It's a pity we don't get more variation in this list, but it's fun, you know, because there's just not that many units like them. And if you've been following my videos, I've been going on forever about unique units, and this is definitely a unique unit. I just don't know of any other units that can move so quickly, that can square, quality is good, large unit. It's just great fun really to see them and play against them. They look great, don't they? So thumbs up from me. So yeah, they are third on my list. Second on my list, I'm going for the dismounted men-at-arms. Absolutely awesome unit. I'm sure most of you would agree you'd have it high up on your list, and maybe some of you would have it at number 1. There's an argument to be had there. Just very, very solid, superior quality, fully armored, so it can take a lot of missile fire. And then once it gets going, when I looked at the stats, on impact it's 50 up against loads of infantry, defensive spear, armored spear, lowland spear, billman, all those units 50 up on impact, 25 up against mercenary men-at-arms, and evens against veteran spear, because that unit has the quality, the superior quality as well. And then, but then it really kicks in once in melee. That's when you see this unit really going to town. Against defensive spear and armored spear, 160 up in melee. Lowland spear, 135 up in melee. Billman, 100 up in melee. Veteran spear even 110 up in melee. And the dismounted mercenary men-at-arms, 35 up in melee. So it absolutely destroys most infantry, well actually all infantry. I don't think there's any other infantry units that can better it. So yeah, a real star. It does cost a lot, 81, but it's well worth it. It's well worth it for quality and armor. It's the hammer in most armies, or the vital cog. I mean, this is the English army, and we've got no men-at-arms. We've got no knights, and we've only got light lancers. We've got some of the smaller, the smaller men-at-arms, but I'm not sure how good they are. So these units are absolutely vital to an army like the English. So fortunately, they are pretty good. So yeah, definitely a worthy inclusion on my list, and they go in at number 2. At number one on my list, you probably guessed it, the men-at-arms, what the knights always wanted to be. They've really been buffed. They've got the bonus now. Infantry suffer an additional -1 modifier against them, and my tests against your regular infantry, defensive spear, billman, they were more often than not disrupting on impact. When you look at the stats, defensive spear, they're up 100 on impact. Billman, they're up 150. Dismounted men-at-arms even, they're 100 up on impact. Can you believe it? Okay, the dismounted men-at-arms are superior quality, so generally speaking they won't disrupt, but 100 down on impact, even for these guys, they do disrupt. So really awesome unit now that it's been improved a bit. There's maybe even an argument that they're too overpowered. So let's see how the tournaments go. Let's see how they do in multiplayer, especially, and we'll see. But even in melee, I was checking against defensive spear, they're 150 up in melee. Against billman, they're 90 up, because billman get the armor advantage. And against dismounted men-at-arms, they are 10 down in melee. But got to factor into account that because they are lancers, knightly lancers, they're just bouncing all the time, so they just keep getting the impact over and over again. They are like tanks now in this game. Okay, I guess you can, the slight weakness is missile fire. You've got to concentrate your archers on them, and there are a lot of bowmen around now on the battlefield, so maybe that balances it all out. But one-on-one against any infantry, they're going to be at least 100 up, and with the advantage with the cohesion check, yeah, fearsome. They're a fearsome unit. So yeah, justifiably they go in at number 1. So there we are. That's my top 10. Please leave comments below. Maybe there's a few units that you think I should have included. Anything you want to suggest or maybe argue about, please leave your comments below. And it'll take me a few weeks probably, but I will. What I always do, I do my top 10, and then I do a top 10 of the worst units. And I've already got some ideas, so we're gonna go on to that as well. But it's been an absolutely fantastic DLC. I've gone on record as saying that it's the best DLC so far in the franchise, and that's including Ancients. I really did like Immortal Fire. That was my favorite DLC of all, but this has probably surpassed it because of all these different units we get: the Billman, the Dismounted Men at Arms, the Longbowmen, the artillery, the guns. Yeah, it's just it's been a lot of fun, and I know a lot of you agree on that. So thanks a lot for watching, and see you again soon.